Hey there, it's Bram Kanstein, and in this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I'm joined by Axel Raven, also known as Financial Physics on TikTok and X. In his videos, he talks about why our debt-based economies feel broken, and he challenges millions of people to rethink money, inflation, the value of their labor, and their financial future. We dive deep into the effects of broken money, the true roots of inflation, and why Axel believes that Bitcoin is the key to restoring value, dignity, and long-term thinking in our societies. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you do too. And if you did, please like this video and subscribe on YouTube or follow me on your favorite podcasting platform to help me spread the message of Bitcoin even further. I really appreciate your support. Now let's dive into this episode. All right, Axel Raven, welcome to
Howdy.
Bitcoin for Millennials.
Howdy. Pleasure to be with you. It's nice of you to have me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. As I just told you off mic, I think I've been following you for like a year or something. You just popped up on my feed and I was like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about and he brings it, well, you just said in a boring way, but I think actually in a very comprehensive way, really from first principles, talking about, you know, the economic and financial problems in the US that eventually, of course, also touch the rest of the world. You are pretty much also very big into Bitcoin. So I thought, you know, you are a great person to talk to, and I would love to get your perspective today. And yeah, maybe just a nice place to start is because you're also a physicist. How did your journey into physics and finance lead you to eventually see these problems and advocate for Bitcoin as the transformative force that it is?
So as time goes on, I mean, how do I begin this? I started off as a business owner for the longest time, and I've been in private business almost my entire life, so like 36 years now. And when you, as with anything that you do, and you kind of probably know how this works, there's, you know, pattern recognition. You know, we talk about these kinds of things periodically. The internet in particular talks about pattern recognition all the time. And when you're in business long enough, you start to see a pattern of behavior. And one of the patterns that I noticed, and this is starting many years ago, is that the amount of money that one is making, it continually erodes. Now, this is when I was a kid. I started noticing this, that if you tried to save it, you know, you always have to make money with your money as opposed to just being able to save your money, because your spending power is decreasing. So cut to several years later when I really started noticing that this, until you fix the money issue, everything else like really doesn't matter, right? You're this is a good friend of mine a long time ago. He said pretty much the same thing. He's like, until you fix the money, I don't want to hear about anything else. I'm done. I don't even care. Like, I don't care about politics. I don't care about, because until you're going to fix the money issue, all this other stuff is just a bunch of busy work. It's just a bunch of people running around doing stuff. But so it got me into that's actually what happened, is that by the time I was probably in my early 20s, I started really noticing this stuff. And definitely by the time in my 30s is when I started pushing the advocacy aspect of it and just pointing out, like, this has to stop. This can't continue. This is going to be a disaster for people who are doing the work and trying to save money, but they're going to, in other words, you're going to have this problem of people earning more dollars than they've ever made, working harder than they've ever worked, but going backward financially faster than they've ever gone. And so as a Gen Xer, I noticed that. And that was back 20 years ago. So it's only gotten worse now. So much so that, like, you know, if we look back into 2020, for example, which isn't that far back, that's not that long ago, you know, prices, if I'm being kind, most people would say, yeah, pretty much the price of everything has doubled in the last 5 years. Well, okay, did your wages double for the same job? Probably not. And that's a problem, especially for younger people who are trying to survive in a world that is really kind of against them at this point. So
Yeah.
From that perspective, from the business perspective, is where I started on all of this, is just watching all of this, and then watching my competitors, many competitors that were larger competitors, getting progressively more subsidized. This is sort of and it's almost, and I hate to do this, but I mean, it's almost impossible to remove politics from Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is money. And of course, wherever there's money, there's soon to be politicians. That's just how it works. That's the rules. They're like sharks to blood. They go right where the money is. And and that's what ends up. So that's how I started seeing it. So there was a lot of subsidies, and it's like, okay, well, how do you compete against a competitor that's being subsidized? It's not really possible. You can work until you're blue in the face, and it's not going to make any difference because your competitor is being subsidized, and either directly or indirectly. That's everything that I've explained. That's what has really pushed a lot of this, to the point where about 3 years ago is when I started doing this publicly and started trying to teach this in kind of my own way. Because a lot of this isn't taught in any. I don't think there's any part of academia that teaches any of this. At least the stuff that I talk about anyway. If you've seen some of my other work, like I point out like the 5 things that you look at for any civilization. If you really want to know where a civilization is going to go, and you want to see whether it's going to survive, and it doesn't make any difference what civilization is or what group of people, doesn't make any difference. There's 5 things you're going to look at. Number 1 is the currency. Number 2 is the birth rates. Number 3 is small business. Number 4 is going to be property ownership. And number 5 is taxes. And if you know how to look at those 5 things, you can tell whether any civilization, no matter what it is doomed or not. And right at the top of the stack is the currency, because if the currency is like the USD or any of these fiat currencies, the rubles, the yen, the euro, it doesn't matter. They're conjured from nothing. And so you've got a bunch of people who work all day long to make, whatever, 500 euros or something like $500. And these people print it in a matter of milliseconds. It's just, it's instantaneous. They'll print $500 billion and not think twice about it. And that type of inflation is what's destroying so many people. So it becomes a really serious topic very quickly, especially for people trying to live. Especially younger people who are like, hey, I'm gonna have a family, and I want to do, I want to do the same stuff that my parents did, right? Because that's kind of what we want to do. We want to do the things that our parents did, and then it becomes like, well, it's the meme, right? It's all the fault of avocado toast and lattes. That's not true. That's not true at all. Not even close. And it just becomes frustrating. So I don't want to overtalk that, but I mean, like that's what started a lot of this for me.
Yeah, I love that. It's in Bitcoin we say everything is downstream from the money, but
everything. Yeah.
You made me think of everything is downstream from the quality of the money, right? Because you can see that something just doesn't add up.
No, well, that's just it. The math doesn't math. There was somebody was asking, like, well, if my wages increase, then wouldn't the price of everything else increase? Yes, the answer is yes. That's exactly what would happen. There's no. It's sort of like trying to explain the point of inflation. From a banker, I mean, like, if people take the time to think, put yourself in the position of a banker or a politician, and your job is to enslave as many people as possible, right? Like, that's your goal. So, and a lot of people have a hard time doing that, right? They don't want to be the villain. No. Stop. Be the villain for a while. Just go into that headspace for a little while, and just accept that there are a lot of people that are like this, and their job is to do this. So the point of inflation is that you can never get ahead of it. That's the point of inflation.
Yeah.
If
control.
Right. If you could keep up with inflation, there would be no point in doing it. It would just be an exercise in futility. So what their job is to always keep people in debt. And so, of course, when I answered his question, I was just pointing out that whatever debt you have that's fixed, if you raise a minimum wage, for example, it was a minimum wage discussion is where it was coming from, is that, it isn't to try and solve poverty. I'm not a simpleton. I realize that just increasing the money supply doesn't solve poverty. I totally understand that. But it does wipe out debt.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. Bitcoin is financial sovereignty, so why compromise when you need liquidity? Meet Debify, the Bitcoin-backed lending platform made by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Debify connects you to institutional-grade liquidity and allows you to borrow fiat or stablecoins, all while keeping your Bitcoin 100% under your control with a non-custodial 3 out of 4 multi-sig escrow solution. Get competitive rates from a global marketplace of institutional-grade lenders, with loan terms that you choose, from 1 month up to a year. There are no hidden fees and there is no rehypothecation, just pure Bitcoin-aligned lending with the highest level of transparency and security. Are you ready to unlock liquidity without ever selling a single sat? Go to debify.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to check out their current lending offers. That's debify.com/Bram.
And it wipes out the currency as quickly as possible, which is what you want. You want the currency to go away as quickly as possible, and to be seen as a joke. The Zimbabwe dollar, right? We've all seen, the big stacks of, those giant stacks of $100 trillion bills. They're just comical. They're like cartoon level. They're that movie Idiocracy. They're insanity. And once the dollar is seen like that, then I think what happens is that people will start to see that all fiat currency is pretty much like that. If you're just going to conjure it from nothing, then it's really not going to have any either intrinsic nor mathematical value. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin solves the mathematical value issue. And it's, when I come on Bitcoin podcasts, this is when I'm actually free to talk about Bitcoin as much as I want. If you notice that, I don't talk a ton about Bitcoin. I don't. I bring it up and I do understand it. But I don't talk about it all the time, just because there's so many guys doing that, right? There's lots of other guys, there's a lot of other things that I think that are fundamentals that people should understand first once you arrive. I think, in my opinion, if you understand the fundamentals of money better, once you hit Bitcoin, you lock in. You're like, nope, now I get it. I'm done. I'm done with fiat. I'm done with the whole, it's a scam. All of it's a scam. And so that's kind of the sort of the backdoor approach that I've taken to it, is if we can get younger people to understand, yes, you are being ripped off. If it's priced in dollars, if it's priced in euros, if it's priced in rubles or yen, or if it's priced in any of these units of measurement, whatever, and because they're not units of measurement, they're loose units of measurement that change whenever it's convenient for them. Mm-hmm. And if you realize you're being ripped off by anything priced in that, then that's going to change the deal. And then you change the way people think. I still have people that do this thing like, well, when they say things like, well, Bitcoin's valued in dollars. That's not true. You're valuing it in dollars. Bitcoin doesn't change. The math behind Bitcoin doesn't change. The gold, 1 troy ounce of fine gold, that didn't change. That's 1 troy ounce of fine gold. That's the end of it. There's no, that unit of measurement didn't change. Only your perception of it did. because you're trying to convert it into dollars to try and buy something at a store or pay a bill or what have you.
When you mention like younger people, what, of course, I'm trying to talk to my generational peers here for millennials. Why should millennials pay attention to Bitcoin right now? And do you think they have certain unique challenges they face today that actually make it urgent for them to understand that they should move to Bitcoin as their money?
So I first heard about Bitcoin in early 2010 is when somebody talked to me about Bitcoin. And because of exactly the issue you just brought up, the way it was explained to me was, oh, look, it's like Axel, this is awesome. I made, $25. That was exactly how it was explained to me. It was like, oh, see, look, it went up. It's like a stock and I made $25. And I was immediately not interested anymore. I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't really solve my problem or anything. Like, that doesn't, just another, in other words, it was sold to me like just yet another casino, yet another thing that another asset. And it's like, okay, so I ignored it until like 2016. And it was exactly what we're talking about here. When it was finally explained to me again, from the other side, not from the technical side, but from the mathematical side, that I'm like, okay, hold on now. And I was immediately very angry at the person who explained it to me back in 2010, because had they explained that to me the right way, I'd have bought like probably 10,000 Bitcoin, for whatever it was, $600 or something at the time. And I probably would have just sat on it forever. I would have just buried that hard drive someplace. But yeah, that's how I've seen it. So as to your question of like of urgency, no government is going to stop printing money. They can't. I mean, we see that even today in the U.S. I'm not sure how many of your how much of your audience is either states based or whatever. I imagine they're probably all over the world. And in the U.S., we have being proposed this so-called big beautiful bill, which is just more money printing. That's really all it is. It's just another excuse to print a bunch of dollars. And it's like, that's not going to stop. There's, $228 trillion of collective debt. Now, that's just the US. That's not even counting the rest of the world. So if you want to use dollars as a unit, as a metric, I guess, there's $228 trillion. Like, there's no GDP in any country that's going to solve this. Combined with, you've got something like between, and I've heard conflicting numbers, but somewhere between 93 and 96 countries all over the world that are in straight up demographic decline, meaning that they're not having enough kids to support this delusion of just more money printing. So it's a compounded problem. It's even worse than just money printing. You're money printing into an economy. An economy is just people, into an economy of a decreasing number of in the market. So you run the risk, and this is what they're all running the risk of, is hyper printing money to the point where even little kids kind of figure it out and go, you know what, I don't want any of this. Because they're going to go, well, I don't know how this is going to have, how it's going to have any value if you're just going to print it. I mean, in the US, we are realistically, and this is just my take on it. I mean, when you figure you get about, would say somewhere between 15 and 20% annual inflation, that qualifies as hyperinflation. That's ridiculous to have inflation that bad. And wages are nowhere going to be even close to keeping up with that. So for the time being, I would tell somebody, well, it's a way of protecting what wealth you already have. So if you're a millennial and let's say you have $5,000 in savings or something like that, I'm just using that number arbitrarily. I don't know what the stats are, but if that's what somebody had, and then they say, okay, well, I'm gonna use this, I'm gonna convert this from dollars to Bitcoin or euros or whatever into Bitcoin, and I'm gonna take it off the exchange, which is always important. Take it off the exchange and put it in your wallet. Then you at least are not as susceptible to what's coming, in my view, because the money printing isn't going to stop, and the number of Bitcoin isn't going to increase. Whatever, 21 million whole coin units, 2.1 quadrillion sats. That number's not going to increase. So we are faced with a technology that I don't think that, and this is going back to the very first video I ever did, where I used the Fibonacci sequence as an example. This is back on YouTube, and that video still exists. It's a really old video. And I even combed my hair for that video. I went all out, which doesn't happen for me. It's rare that I do that. I tell people, if you see me show up without any stubble and stuff, that's the evil Axel from another dimension. So
and then you're serious.
Right, yeah. And so no, there's but I pointed this out, that this type of technology with Bitcoin, that I think that there's quite a few people even in the Bitcoin space that don't fully understand the ramifications of what this means to have an actual hard currency that doesn't change, and we know exactly how much there is, and you can't double count it, unlike gold. This is the challenge that gold has, and even I recognize this, that gold has that fungibility, that hyper fungibility, where it can be double counted. The auditors, whomever they are, can count that same bar of gold over and over. Bitcoin doesn't allow for that. So you have an opportunity, so younger people have an opportunity to maybe preserve quite a bit of wealth. Now it's not going to solve the problem of the it's not going to get you out of work. You might be able to have some wealth for a while, but eventually you're going to have to do some work, because eventually the people who do all the work will absorb all the money. In a hard money economy, the people who do the work will absolutely absorb the money.
Yes,
just like 80%. They will it'll get hoovered up, and that's just how it is. And so this is kind of a once in a millennium opportunity for people to capitalize on that, kind of, and say, yeah, hey, I'm going to pull some of this off the internet, and it's just going to be mine, and I own it, and it can't really be stolen, not easily. It'd be tough, especially if it's off the internet. So yeah, that's where I'm at on that.
I'd say to kind of summarize, I like what you said also about, I heard someone say you can only cut, grow, or print yourself out of a deficit, right? People should be immensely aware of the fact that, Bitcoin with an absolute verified supply and verified, you can verify that for yourself. That's the whole point, right? You don't have to use a third party like with gold, the gold you mentioned. It's a tool to not only save, but actually also to protect yourself from the shock that is coming.
Yeah. If the shock actually happens, it goes in your favor. Just coincidentally, it goes in your favor, as opposed to against you radically. So the people out there that are saving all of their money in large amounts of dollars or whatever, if they're, if the USD were to collapse, which is my stated mission, it has been, very honest about that, it'll take down about 90 countries with it, probably. It'll just wipe out currencies all over the place. There'll be so much shock and chaos everywhere. It'll be absolutely glorious. Well, long overdue. But after that initial shock is over with, then people have to put things back together, and then they have to go, okay, hold on, now it's time to get real, and we need to figure out what this is going to work. I would say to the point of AI, and this is my opinion. Okay, so this is just my read on everything. While I think AI is a spectacular tool from a virtual standpoint, and it is. I mean, AI is incredible, and it's horribly entertaining. I can watch these crazy videos. There's the video of George Washington with the selfie stick walking through his camp. There's the ones of Jesus walking through it's hilarious. It's great stuff, and it's awesome from an entertainment standpoint. But it's not going to roof your house. It's not going to fix your gutters. It's not going to 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 make sure that your the proper size, gauge, and dimensions, and the amount of rebars in your concrete, so that you don't have a bridge collapse on you and take out a bunch of people. It, like, at a certain point, someone has to do all this, the stuff, the part that keeps the world running. And this isn't my pitch. This isn't my micro pitch. That's not what this is. I'm just pointing out that there's always going to be something to do for everybody. I think the question is just how, what are people going to want to do? And so in that regard, I actually think that's actually rather hopeful, because there is a level of freedom and understanding that and this is, I think this happens to a lot of us now, and it happens to Gen Xers. I think it happens to millennials, Gen Z, definitely Gen Z. It definitely happens to them, where we all, again, this is myself included. So this is four fingers and a thumb coming back at me on this. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. We all get kind of sucked into our phones or into the virtual world, and it's very easy for that to happen, because it has everything you kind of want. It's a lot of fun. It's the oasis, if you want to call it that, the fictional, that book, Ready Player One, or the movie, the Spielberg movie, Ready Player One. It's the same thing. It has that allure. We forget that there's a whole world the real world that's out here. Mm-hmm. And in that real world, there is a ton of stuff to do. It's just a matter of who's going to go and do all of that. And right now, a lot of folks don't want to. This has been a criticism of. This has been building actually for a couple of weeks now, and I've been touching on this with some of the videos. If you've seen any of my stuff, I've been kind of glancing off this. Like, a lot of people are you're not looking for a solution. You're looking to try and make the problem not matter to you. That's not the same thing as looking for a solution.
Yeah.
So if you're going to look for a solution, then you may or may not get rich off of it. I certainly won't get insano rich off of Bitcoin. I have Bitcoin, and I do have it off the internet, but I'm not Michael Saylor. I'm not, or these whales. I'm not one of these guys that have got big, or Max Kaiser, or these guys that got like piles of Bitcoin across, 50 different hard drives or whatever it is they have. So I have no delusions of that. I know that even if the dollar collapsed tomorrow morning, I still have to go to work. I know that.
But that's okay, right?
And that's okay, especially if I'm now being paid in currency that isn't going to be wiped out. That's actually a better situation. Now I actually feel comfortable with doing the job that I'm doing, because it's like I know that I'm not going to have my currency wiped out by money printing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to touch on, right? Like, so when you said it will be a glorious moment when the currency collapses, right? Some people will listen and think like, what does he mean? But I think what you're talking about is that, the currency that we all have now, whether it's euros or dollars or yen, right? They are the same type of money, fiat money by decree. So there are some people that benefit from this type of money, but it's not you and me, right? It's not the general plebs that benefit from that. And so you see a lot of, and this is something that you talk about as well, right? You mentioned things like a competency crisis, but also what we talked about, everything is downstream from the money. I say a lot something like along the lines of, everything you would ever want to fix in the world, everything that people are demonstrating against, like, the root cause is the money, right? Mm-hmm. If you really want to do,
they don't know that, but it is.
They don't know that, yeah. So you just have to switch the money, and then you take power away from the people that are controlling the money. But maybe you could elaborate a bit on how what do we see, or what could people notice right now? What are things that fiat money actually breaks down in society? Like, how does it fuel a societal decline? How do you think about that?
Well, if we want to hit, it depends on how hard you want me to hit. But if you want me to hit really hard, let's just take a look at relationships. The between men and women right now. It sucks, and I think that I don't think it matters who you ask anymore. I think you could ask 100 men, if relationships with women suck, and they'd say, and 99% of them go, probably, yeah, like, dude, this sucks. This is no, and it'd be the same thing for women, right? They would say, oh my God, men are horrible. And it's everything's, it really truly is downstream of the quality of the money. And I'll make the case for that. Let's be real, in a hard money economy, an actual hard money economy, where the money can't be inflated, bullshit jobs go away almost instantly, because companies cannot have that anymore.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want: Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code Bram to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with StampSeed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, StampSeed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from StampSeed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with StampSeed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order.
All these HR departments vanish overnight because you don't need them anymore. You never really needed them anyway. They were just kind of something that got lumped into. No, what would happen is that most businesses at that point are going to try and become as efficient as absolutely possible. They don't have a choice in a hard money economy. Like you have to bring your A game to that. If you're going to play in that game, you got to bring your A game, and you have to bring value. So that means your price has to ideally come down. Now it can only come down to a certain point. There's a threshold, and in a hard money economy, most businesses find that threshold, and they have to make a profit. That's true, but it's going to level off and adjust with all the other competitors out there, which is pretty common, especially for anybody, anybody in construction or anybody in, like I work in construction too. So anybody in construction will say the same thing. Like if you're competing with a bunch of small competitor construction companies, they're all going to be roughly in line with each other in price because they know what it's going to take to produce the same kind of quality, especially if we're apples to apples making comparison. Well, the same thing is true for your quality of your work, if I'm asking you to part with hard money that doesn't lose value, you're going to be picky about what you buy, about what you're willing to part with. And that pickiness is going to be, okay, I want the highest possible quality for the least amount of money that I can get away with. And we have something called price discovery. And that is a very normal market function that is supposed to exist. Where I was going with that before is like I use the Fibonacci sequence, and I use this example of if you change one equation here, the success of the next equation might be by itself correct. It might be, 5 plus 8 is 13. That's correct, but it's out of sequence with the rest of the sequence. So everything beyond that is going to be distorted. And of course, this is what you point out with the way of looking at, all the people rioting and looting and so on. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's downstream of the money. If the money were fixed, now they don't know that. They're way down the chain somewhere and they're just doing their thing. But if the money were fixed, then there isn't any fake money to throw at these people to say, hey, go out there and throw bricks at stuff.
we talk about these problems and slowly weave in Bitcoin, etc. It's just too much to ask from people to go like all the way back to basically realizing that they have no clue what money is, and that they were guided by something that they just had no clue about, which is just a horrible realization, I would say, right? That's just, I think, what is hard for people to get to, because eventually, it's just a really tough lesson. Like you said before, like you're being scammed. I say you're being bamboozled. That's maybe even a bit nicer than scammed, right? But I mean, it's really that. And when I realized that, I was like, damn, I'm getting bamboozled here, man.
It affects even, I would go so far as to say it will even have a major effect on psychology. It'll have a major effect on the way we perceive intelligence. I'm not kidding about this. Like, I'm not, human intelligence, because there's this idea of, well, let's just do an IQ test kind of thing. Like, I'm not a big believer in that personally, but I think that it really does change everything downstream. It really is. It changes the way everybody thinks. Right now, the level of distortion or demoralization, if you want to, that's really what it is. It's demoralization.
Yes.
And that level of demoralization that's happened, to come back from that, which I would love to see. I'd absolutely love to see that, especially if when people really realize that, yeah, you are being ripped off and you are being scammed. And maybe, let's be fair, maybe even the people who are scamming you don't even realize they're scamming you.
Oh, probably.
Like, right? I mean, like, they don't even understand it themselves. It's sort of like, so your parents come into this life in the middle of a movie, right? They have no idea what's going on. They rely on their parents to bring them up to speed. And if their parents weren't paying attention, then they're going to get half the story, or maybe half the story, right? And then you show up and you're just being told the information that they had.
Yes,
so they
exactly.
may have, like, and it's not just like that. It's like that for everybody. Everything downstream of that, they may be genuinely telling you something that they believe in their soul is correct.
Yeah,
but it's mathematically not. Even though when you go back and you show it to them, there is this massive disbelief. There's this disconnect, I think, that happens. You have but to look at maybe a few people that are angry to argue with me on Twitter. Like, it's like, yeah, I understand that you're frustrated with it, and no, I'm not very good at teaching a lot of this. I don't present myself as an expert. I don't do that kind of stuff. I'm not. That's not my personality. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. I'm informing you what I'm seeing, and this comes from decades of experience of having to deal with this stuff in the real world every day. That I've had to put up with this stuff, and and from the ground level. I don't come at this from a top down. I did not come from wealth. I don't come from any of that. I grew up in the projects. I don't know what the European equivalent of that would be, but about as poor as you can grow up in the West. That's me. About as pretty much as poor as you can grow up. No father in the house, single mom. I'm like, all of it, every statistic against me the entire time. So I see all of this from that perspective. I see all of it from growing up and having to fight my way through all of that. And with the idea of, okay, well, yeah, so if I just do what these other guys are doing, this is going to work for me. And it doesn't. So why is that? That's what led me to start unwinding a lot of this. And this is why this isn't a conspiracy. Never attribute, I think somebody famous said, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And it's like, I really think that a lot of these guys are really just don't know. They really don't know. They just assume that they're going along with the program. So it's why you have these people that live in like the little financial bubble. They grew up in a middle class lifestyle. Their parents, their great grandparents own some acreage somewhere, and little by little, the family has been selling that acreage off, and so they've been living on that largesse, not realizing that the rest of the world doesn't have that. Like, a lot of people don't like I didn't have any of that. I'm like, I didn't have any grandparents that had property from back when they been selling it off. Like no one. But I've run into people who have that, who've have that kind of money privilege, if you want to call it that, and many of them are still disconnected. And then when you try to explain it to them, they're like, no, it's not like, dude, no, it really is. There's people out there that work all the time. In fact, that's all they do is work. They work 2 jobs. All they do is work. And those people are getting progressively more frustrated because the money is worth less and less and less. You've been able to be insulated by the little bubble. These people haven't. Millions, hundreds of millions of people, actually billions worldwide, they haven't had that, and they're being ripped off. I mean, so
what's like at the top of the tree? What's the most important thing someone should understand about money or Bitcoin, for that matter, that you wish everyone would just see?
If I were to try and think of one thing that would be, well, it would be more of a concept than anything that would be like, it wouldn't be Bitcoin specific, although Bitcoin is how you would get there. But I just answered this for somebody else, and I'm going to try and shorten it a little bit because it was a lengthy answer I gave. But this is what I would say, is that beware of promises in the future. Always beware of that. So when it doesn't make a difference if it's a company, a government, bank, it doesn't matter. A country, it doesn't make any difference. If they're making you a bunch of promises, you have to make sure that they have the ability to make that happen, right? Because a lot of people can promise a lot of. So I'll use an example for people who don't maybe understand what I mean by this. You go to apply at a job, and the job says, hey, if you show up here and you do this job, we're going to pay you X amount of money. And then and then they say, okay, great. You're like, okay, that's a good idea. And they say, yeah, and if you do a little extra, and then make yourself kind of valuable, then you'll work hard and you'll get ahead, and then we'll promote you. Like, hold on, there's a lot of variables in all of what you just said. What do you mean by work hard? What do you mean by get ahead? What do you, and who says I did a good job? Like, there's just, in other words, you need to start nailing this kind of stuff down. And this is what professional negotiators do. Start hammering that stuff down. Most people are full of shit, and they have no way to do any of this. They have no way to make good on any of the promises they've made you. And when you see that, and what about the people who do? Okay, well, that's where Bitcoin comes in. Because in the case of, for instance, old money, old school money, gold, it either weighs or it doesn't. It's pure or it's not. You have it or you don't. That's it. That's all there is to it. Period. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Bitcoin, you either have it or you don't. That's it. It's that fast. So yep. It clarifies. It will absolutely clarify the relationship that you have with any company or with anybody with whom you're engaged in commerce. It clarifies that relationship. That's probably the number one thing that if I could teach anybody, is just how to think about it like that.
Fiat money incentivizes you to talk, and talk is cheap. Like the fiat money is cheap, right? And it's easy. And I think we've all kind of adjusted to listening to the talk and forgetting to check if there's actually a walk, like you mentioned.
That
right?
is a perfect way of putting that.
Yeah,
and Bitcoin forces you to absolutely walk. Spectacular way of putting that.
Oh, thank you.
Bitcoin does. It presses the matter. It forces the issue.
Well, like you said, you have it or not.
You have it or you don't.
So you do it or you
verify
don't.
it. Yeah, you can verify it. If you're so let's use an example. If you have a true hard money economy worldwide, let's say the whole world adopts Bitcoin, and that's what's being used as currency now. Not backing something, not some crazy gimmick, not a bunch of third party. No, let's just say that was the case. If you had a situation like that, you would know very quickly whether a company was going to be solvent in a year or not. You'd know they were going to be around. You could look at the CEO's behavior and tell whether or not that company has a prayer of surviving. You'd be able to look at their profit margins and say, okay, do you have enough profit margin to make good on all these promises you're making people? Because you're making a bunch of people who work here a bunch of promises. And I'm looking at your balance sheet, and you may or may not have enough profit to make good on all this. So that means that someone's going to be stuck without a chair when the music stops. And it's not going to be me. So like this is where people get to negotiate a little harder on this kind of stuff. And I think that like when the Industrial Revolution really started to move forward after 1865. So in the States, of course, that's after the war. I think a lot more money printing happened then than people realize, and it fueled a lot of really big companies. And I think that a lot of gold started getting double and triple and quadruple counted. That's what I really think started happening. I think a lot of the gold certificates back in the day, because there used to be the certificates that says, oh, it's backed by gold. And like, okay, that's great. It's backed by gold. But how many people are showing up saying, yeah, fill up my bag full of gold? Most people didn't. In fact, the vast majority of people never did that. So there's this ever-present temptation, you know how this works, to just keep printing gold notes and just keep buying stuff up and inflate the prices of things beyond what the market would have actually dealt with. The market would have absorbed, and so I think that that's actually what happened. And I think it just continued right on up to 1913 before when the Federal Reserve was necessary because of all the bank runs that were caused because of overlending, and banking malpractices, like hyper lending out way too much money on very sketchy things, which again goes back to what I was saying, like where in the old school banking days, if you came to me and I'm the banker and you tell me your business model, I'm going to look at your balance sheet. I'm going to look at all this, and I'm going to be able to tell whether or not that company has a prayer of surviving. And if it doesn't, there's no way I'm loaning you one penny because I know what's coming. Bitcoin 100% clarifies that. 100% clarifies all that, because you have it or you don't. You have the customer base or you don't. You have the Bitcoin or you don't. It 100% clarifies all of it. It clarifies the relationship between the employer and the employee. It clarifies the relationship between the teachers and the students. It clarifies all of these relationships, and it does it in a way that has never existed before, where in theory the average person can verify all of this stuff. They don't need to go and find 5 other people to triple verify. No, they can verify it themselves. They can go look. It's no different than running an acid test on your own. On gold, somebody brings gold and you put it on you do an acid test and everything. It's the same thing. It's just you're able to do it yourself, and it doesn't require that. And on top of that, you also have the advantage of not having to guess. Like in the case of gold, I'm not just bashing gold, because gold is still very important to understand. It really is. It's a very important commodity to understand. If I could get people to understand gold, I can get them to make the leap to Bitcoin very quickly. But if they understand that idea, like one of the challenges with gold is that if you ask somebody, well, how much gold is there in the world? The correct answer is nobody knows. That's the correct answer. Nobody really knows. We can guess, but we don't really know 100%. So
I think that's why Bitcoin is so radical, because you can actually verify everything around Bitcoin for yourself, which just sounds too good to be true in a world of talk that we're accustomed to. Right?
It does. It really changes the deal. I can see why governments and companies out there, many big companies, don't like it. Because of that clarification, it eliminates insurance as an industry.
Yes.
Insurance as an industry can't survive in a Bitcoin environment. It just can't. World, according to Axel, I mean, if the US dollar were to collapse tomorrow morning, I think you'd have about a year to 2 years of complete and total chaos in every direction as people try to adjust to it. And it would take down a bunch of other fiat currencies right along with it. After that, I think you'd actually have a renaissance. I really do. I think you'd have a renaissance, the like of which this planet has never seen, because unlike the Renaissance days of Europe, for example, 500,000 years ago, unlike those type of Renaissance, it's localized in certain areas, and not everybody saw a lot of that stuff. So there was probably, I mean, think about it. There were probably works of art that nobody ever saw except for 10 people, and that got destroyed in some fire somewhere. And that, like, that if they were found today, they would be considered priceless works of art. Yes. that we couldn't believe, but they've been destroyed. In today's world, because we do have the digital advantage,
you can broadcast it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have that loss. You wouldn't have that. Imagine someone somewhere, like literally in his garage, building something, and then it's really cool. People really like it, and then people see it. And they, and it's not just seen by 10 guys or just his family members, and then the guy dies. And no, what if millions of people see it? What if tens of millions of people see it? And what if out of the tens of millions, maybe 100,000 people are inspired by something like that, and they build on to that? There's a level of synergy that exists in the world at that point that we can't have today, because it gets absorbed by all the corporate branding and everything else. And if somebody says, "Oh, I want to start some kind of company or something like that," they are immediately, basically the idea is stolen from them for the most part, and then a competitor is subsidized and so on, and it turns it into this meat grinder of. And of course, how this works with big companies or big government. Either one of them, it doesn't make any difference. They both suck, and it's always turned into, how can we make this the most profitable, as opposed to how can we make this the best?
Yes.
It's a totally different philosophy. The best isn't always the most profitable, but it's the best. And that's the part that's missing. The USD is not going to collapse on its own. It's going to go on as long as people keep accepting it for payment. It'll go on forever. It'll be inflated. It'll be $1 million for a gallon of gas, and it won't matter. And people will still keep using this stupid shit. It has to go away. When it goes away, that's when you can have your renaissance. It really kind of is that way. And I realize that maybe it's considered. It is, to us, it's a peaceful solution, right? To the bankers, it's not. They consider that tantamount to shots fired. That Bitcoin even exists, and especially when someone would talk about something like this, and especially with no debt, because Bitcoin effectively ends debt as we understand it. You might have somebody, some whales who get together and they put some Bitcoin into a couple of ideas or something like that. You might have things like that, but not like what we have now, where everything is just fueled by endless amounts of debt, and everybody has to be 200 grand in the hole at all times. That goes away, and it just changes. It changes the perspective on. I ask my millennial people like this. Some of my followers, because I get DMs periodically, and I'll get people that'll tell me, some things like, "Oh, I've got $250,000 worth of student loans," and on and on and on. And of course, my question is like, well, what if you didn't have that? How would you feel, right? If all that went away, how would you feel?
Yeah.
And most people are like, oh my God, I don't even know how I would feel, because it would be like this huge burden completely gone. I'm like, yeah. So imagine that. Imagine if you owned your house, your car, you didn't have any debt, and imagine that. Imagine how you would feel. How close to retirement would you be? Pretty goddamn close. I mean, in the way that we think of retirement isn't really retirement. Retirement is just being able to live life on your terms.
With everything you know about all of this, what would you do if Bitcoin didn't exist?
If Bitcoin didn't exist, I would still be pushing the same thing I was pushing before, which was the idea of not having a gold standard, but going to gold. Not a gold standard, just gold, period.
Yeah.
No paper gold. Like, you show up and you have coins, that actually, because again, same thing, gold either weighs or it doesn't, it's pure or it's not, you have it or you don't. That's it. So now you don't have to have a third party, you can do it yourself. It's a little harder to explain it to people, but if they learn how to operate in that, because it's just understanding money. on the broader sense, and this is, of course, that's, I mean, if you've followed me for any length of time, like I'm just big on trying to get people to understand how money works. If people can just understand how money works and understand how energy transfer works, because that's really all money is. It's a measurement against your energy. That's all you're doing. It's just a unit of measurement.
Yes.
And if you can understand that, then you can understand why gold was chosen. And it was just because of that, because it just happened to be an element on the periodic table that was a base element and was easy to work with and didn't really have a ton of other commercial uses in the practical sense, which is true. It's even to this day, it has some commercial uses, but not as much as silver. Silver has like hundreds of times more commercial properties than it does monetary properties, although both have monetary properties about them. But in the case of in the case of Bitcoin, it comes along and it says, okay, well, here's something that's actually a better idea. I agree.
I think this is probably the biggest battle that you could ever contribute to.
Probably.
And
that's probably not an overstatement either. That's probably accurate.
Because you see it, and many people don't. That's why it's so hard, right? Because you just have to be like, okay, this is probably a rest of my life thing. Even if I'm not talking about it, I want to see how this is going to play out, because I have this information. I know I'm seeing it. I cannot unsee it. I also cannot go back to that system. So yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, and that's just it. Once you do see it, it's again, same thing. I think the very first video, they called the primer video on YouTube. I think it was the very first video I ever did. And I did point that out to people. I said, this is fair warning. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Yeah. So once you see how all the sausage is made, once you see how all this trick is done, you can't unsee it. It's I would tell somebody, like whenever someone asks about like what book could they read, and I tell them like The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, which is a great book. It's a great book. But I tell them, it's a word of caution. Once you read that book, you can't unread it. And you will start to see all of this stuff. You'll start to see just how bad it really is. And once you take the time to start thinking about it and processing it and talking to other folks that are like, once you start connecting some dots, you'll see just how bad it really has gotten. Yes. Like we're pretty far down that rat hole, and it's going to be a while. And it's like, and it becomes overwhelming. You look at it and go, oh my God, how are we ever going to fix any of this? And it's like, I mean, can it be fixed? Yes. Yeah, I'm hopeful on that. And that's the only reason I'm doing this, is because I actually still have some measure of hope. I would like to see it get pulled out.
Yeah, me too.
Will it? We'll see.
So looking ahead, where do we go from here with everything with Bitcoin? What do you think are perhaps the biggest risks and opportunities for Bitcoin in general? And is there any advice you would give someone who's just waking up to the issues that we talked about and the possible solution of Bitcoin?
The first thing I would say is if you're brand new, I mean, just I guess you could operate a tiny bit on faith. I hate to use that word, but you operate a tiny bit on faith and start taking it more seriously. Start really starting to understand how money works itself, and take the time. Don't be if you spent all that time to get a degree in something, or you spend all that time to go, you can spend 100 or so hours. That's not that much, and most of it is it's just mental. You don't have to go anywhere. It's not like you have to go and push a car up a hill. You're just researching a bit, and you're just taking the time to understand it. And so that'd be the first thing I'd probably say. And as far as looking forward, I'm obviously very bullish. I mean, in terms of like, if someone wanted to look at it like in the dollar or euro sense, yeah, it's just going to keep going up in terms of numbers. But the trick is that can we get past the number go up aspect and get into the more grounded first principles philosophy of what money is supposed to be? And that's the only question mark I have, is can we pull that off? Are there enough people that are looking at Bitcoin, not just because we all see these guys, like where they bring out the charts, right? They bring out the charts and buy Bitcoin here, sell Bitcoin here, and it's like, you guys are really kind of missing the point of why Bitcoin exists. It exists not as just a fun casino for you to play around with and do a bunch of short selling and writing call options and on. Like that's the world around it doing that kind of stuff. That's not Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin isn't changing. It's not gonna move around a bunch. So your stability is in that. So that's my hope. My hope is that we can maybe break past that just a bit, and we'll see how it goes. Again, it's time will tell. We'll see what happens. But time will tell with this whole thing.
I see you also urge people to dedicate like 40 hours to study.
Oh, at least, yeah.
At least, yeah. Well, yeah, I would say it's probably closer to like 200, but I don't want it to be too intimidating. But what are like the practical steps or resources that you would recommend for anyone listening who's early in this journey or is already on their Bitcoin journey, but they want to go deeper into, what we mentioned, the reason of existence, the broken money part?
That's a tough one. I don't have a good answer for that. I really don't.
That's great.
I think that it's important. Just keep looking around. Keep looking around. Find accounts that are out there that talk about this kind of stuff. They're out there. It's not just me. I mean, I'm not that facetious. I mean, no, there's tens of thousands of people who talk about this kind of stuff. Just try to tune into them a little bit. Find someone that resonates with you. Find someone that like you can understand, like you can follow along with them, and then and get what they're saying. And if you can do that, then at least you can, then you start exposing yourself to other ideas over time. That exposition is very important. You don't have to agree with everything that somebody says. I mean, that's ridiculous to suggest that. But you can certainly expose yourself to their ideas. You can entertain the idea without accepting it as your own.
Yeah. What I really like is that I've seen, especially on YouTube, more and more people are starting like Bitcoin and money focused channels, and it's just regular people. They're sitting, like you're standing in a garage, they're sitting in their car just talking in their breaks or like between meetings or whatever, and they're just talking about like, hey, this is my journey. And I follow one guy, he's coming also on the podcast, who is going to the road to 1 Bitcoin is his channel, right? So he's just talking about how he...
That's an ambitious goal right now.
Exactly, yeah. But he talks about how he came to the conclusion that Bitcoin is the only, is a superior savings technology, and he needs 1 Bitcoin for his retirement. And so he's talking about how he got there, and he's showing what he's doing. And so I think... I'm trying this. Like, I know this is not for everyone, or that, what they are doing is not for everyone, but I like what you said. It's just really, kind of like exploring and trying to find the people that resonate with you. So I think that is great advice. And yeah, it's out there, man. Like, all this information is public. That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. Oh, it's out there. There's plenty of information.
Yeah. 100%.
Look for there's plenty of content. Just look for good context.
Yeah. All right, man. Last question. And I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
A core belief that I have that I won't let go of. God, it's a tough one to kind of come up with, because there's a few of them. But trying to think, I guess if I was picking one at random, I suppose, it would be that there's really not a whole lot of replacement for experience. And I mean, it's just that way. When you do enough jobs for any length of time, whether they're physical or mental or both, and in my case, I've had to do all of them. I've had to do all the, I mean, as an owner, so you have all the administrative side, and it also is the guy who's doing all the shit work that nobody wants to do, which is the truth. I mean, all the heavy, in my case, it's literally heavy lifting, because I'm moving giant blocks of concrete around. And I would say that in those cases, there's really not a whole lot of replacement for experience. And sometimes time and service is what it's going to take. So you might learn a lesson. I don't mean you, just anybody. They might learn a lesson that you may not understand for about 10 years. After about 10 years, then you look back and then then that lesson connects 10 years ago. And then it changes your entire perspective of the past. It's a weird thing to have happen. It completely changes in other words, can the future affect the past, right? And in this case, it kind of does in a weird way, because it changes the way you think of all of it. And then there's this sort of ratcheting all the way forward of going, oh, wow. And then you get a completely different perspective. And sometimes that perspective is what you're after. You don't know it at the time, but that's what you actually needed. And you needed it sometime in the future. And you got it in the past, but now you need it in the future, and you didn't know that. So then it has to all stack up. So if I were to say it was any one thing, it would be like sometimes experience is just that way.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing, and thanks so much for this insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
It's always appreciated. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, man. We'll stay in touch. Thanks.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.